The story begins at the mouth of the Klamath River, just south of Crescent City, California. Good morning. How are you?
We're doing real fine. Having a good season.
Oh, have you?
Yes, very good. We're 3 families, and these are all my grandkids. I'm from Hoopa, but I'm Yurok.
Yeah, my dad lives in Hoopa.
Oh, does he?
But we're Yurok also.
Oh, all right.
Yurok Indians have lived here for centuries, thriving on the abundant salmon and other aquatic life. These two are Chinook.
Yeah, yeah, I could see.
Because of
the nose.
the nose.
And then this one here is a hatchery fish.
And how can you tell the difference?
They don't have one of these pilots. They call them pilots. And see, this is a wild one because it's got the pilot. That's how you can tell they're wild. That sucker's heavy. And there's coyotes across the way. You can hear them howling in the morning. And there's a mother bear and her little baby out here. We always watch them. It's phenomenal.
Oh, really?
It's just beautiful. You don't see all this kind of sight, when you're in town.
Yeah.
So that's why I said it's really gifted area, spiritual area is what it is.
I walk, huh? We're shutting a boy. I'm saying thank you to the fish. We shot our liquid. Napoi, school yet. That means the fish is good. We thank the Lord. We thank the Great Spirit for giving us this fish.
Unlike other California Indians, Yuroks living at the mouth of the Klamath were never driven from their homeland. Canneries in the 19th and early 20th centuries employed Yuroks to net salmon and can them.
I forget how many canneries there were along this river right here at the mouth there, we call the estuary. And I can remember they used to have a big cannery right down here where the Requa boat dock is now. My mother and aunts and uncles and everybody else worked down there.
The canneries were a huge industry, employing Yuroks and non-Indians, catching and canning millions of fish going up the river to their spawning grounds. But when Copco, the first dam on the Klamath, was built in 1918, spring Chinook salmon lost hundreds of miles of spawning habitat. The runs declined, with devastating consequences for the canning and fishing industries. Rather than take on the power company that built the dam, canners and fishermen blamed the Indians for the crash in salmon populations. The state placed a ban on the Yurok fishery, even though the federal government had established a reservation here and guaranteed tribal fishing rights.
Okay, in 1933, the state of California assumed that they had authority to cut fishing from this river. In 1933, I think it was, 3 or 4 years old?
The ban held for 40 years.
Offshore fishermen fished, and the tourists still fished on the river. Everybody fished but Indians. Only time they could is if they sneaked at night, and did things at night when there was no one else around. I had an older brother. He would take us kids with him when he'd go. But we always we had a dark blanket. We took that blanket and we would lay underneath the blanket when we'd hear a boat coming. And, we'd lay there and try not to breathe. And, they couldn't hear us breathing, but we didn't know that. We tried not to breathe so that they wouldn't hear us.
My character in the play Watershed was based on the story of Yurok gillnetter Raymond Matz. Now I learned from him firsthand how the ban on Indian fishing was enforced.
I was 11 years old when I got picked up right back here. First time for gill netting. The fishing game came down and picked us up, me and my brother Emery. And they made it just like a big crime, handcuffed us up and everything, just like we're a bunch of criminals.
Raymond was released that time because he was too young. But years later, when he was old enough to be tried, Raymond decided not to plead guilty.
The judge told him, if you pay $1 fine, we'll just let it go. And he said, no, I'm not going to, because we need to get our fishing rights back, and we need to be able to fish on the river. And he said, well, you're not going to get that. So they appealed it, and they went to a higher court.
That turned out to be the start of a long legal battle that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court.
When it finally ended, we won the rights to fish. And I think that's really when people realized they had that right. People started canning and smoking fish and just being Indians again.
Pretty good, huh? Traditional Yurok style.
Things changed in the 1970s when a severe drought affected river levels and salmon habitat. Although Indians were netting less than 5% of the salmon runs, non-Indian fishermen pressured the federal government to stop them.
In 1978, there was a conservation placed on the Yurok fishery, and our people weren't allowed to fish during that season. Yet the commercial fishery and the sport fishery were still conducting a fishery. So while it was under the guise of protection of the salmon, it was only the Indian people who were asked to bear the burden of the conservation at that time. When my people protested the law and they threw out a cork line, which just means a rope with corks on it, to protest the decision over the fishery being closed, federal agents were pulled in, and they were in full riot gear.
The refusal of the Klamath River Indians to comply with the federal ban on gill netting brought Secretary of the Interior Cecil Andrus to the mouth of the Klamath, where he met with tribal members.
The issue is whether Indians have the right to conduct commercial gill netting of salmon on this scenic river, a river they say is theirs. Resort operators and sportsmen say the commercial netting is destroying salmon runs on this major spawning river. It has gone on unrestrained amid a tangle of vague and conflicting laws. Finally, last week, an Interior Department solution, an enforced moratorium on all commercial fishing on the river and fishing, period, near the river mouth. Violent confrontations ensued between defiant fishermen and federal agents.
The feds are all out there. They were all geared up, flak jackets and machine guns.
ARs and assault rifles.
Oh, Christ, they're ready to go to war, those fellas were, man.
I heard click, 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 and that's when I thought, well, we better stop. We pulled back.
And before Andrus was out of town, about 24 Indian gill netting boats were already on the river, in the forbidden waters near the mouth. For 2 hours, they crisscrossed the waters, appearing more intent on demonstrating than fishing, though at least one netted a salmon. Federal agents stayed away, and most of the Indians left. 2 did not, and suddenly the agents were upon them. Then the other Indian boats came back, and for a while it was like aquatic bumper tag.
There was 2 McCovey boys in one of the boats, Richard McCovey and his brother. These were big men in this boat, and Richard and his brother are no small guys, they're heavy set. They grabbed those 2 guys out of that boat like Richard's brother went flying in the boat.
We tried to do it not about as non-violent as we could. So naturally we took a beating.
They held his face in the water until he'd come back up and he was saying, no violence, folks. Then started put his head under there again, and each time he came up, he could, he said less and less. One night, there was about 100 men went down the river to arrest Raymond and the men and women that were down here, and they took my dad. He was 78 then. They took him to jail. It was after my dad was arrested. My mother said, I think we have to do something, she said, because this is where my people live. We have to protect this. And it'd be better if I do it because I'm the living heir to this place. So I said, well, Mama, I'll go with you. So we got her little burden basket and her hat, and off we went down there. Took a net and went out into the water, put the net in the river. At the last minute, my mother got very scared, and she stood up and she started praying. And when she started praying, one of the men in the boat said, "We better get the hell out of here."
Those federal cops, man, all worried out there that we was making Indian bad medicine on them and all that stuff.
Well, the man was trying to make me let go of the net. And I said, "No, I'm not letting them take it." And he said, "Well, you're going to let it go or you're going to go to jail with us." But they didn't take it. She kept praying and praying, and they left it. They left the net and they left.
Yeah, it's going to be